Hi, I'm at Manitoba Ag Days 2026. I'm here with Curtis de Gooijer with Bourgault Industries. Just did a presentation on fertilizer placement and field trials you're doing out in St. Brieux, Saskatchewan, if I'm not mistaken.
St. Brieux, Saskatchewan, you betcha, where the Bourgault factory is at.
Right, you actually have a farm out there where you've been doing some field tests. What are you field testing out there for?
Yeah, so we got about 2,000 acres out there that we get to do equipment testing with when it comes down to new equipment, but more so what I focus in on is the agronomy trials, and we're doing field scale strip trials out there where we're combining kind of a small plot theme with the field scale trials where we replicate things 3 times out in the field,
right,
according to what we're testing then.
Yeah, Curtis, much of your presentation today dealt with seeding rates and plant stands in canola. Talk a little bit about that and what you were seeing in terms of how the plants were filling out in between and the plant competition.
Yeah, so we kind of came from looking at singulation versus volumetric metering, and what we were seeing was guys with planters were decreasing their seeding rates and comparing it to air drills and weren't decreasing their seeding rates. So we said, well, what happens if we decreased our seeding rate with an air drill?
Right.
So our treatments were 5 pounds, typical seeding rate,
right,
and then we go down to 2.5 pounds, and then 1.25 pounds. So we just kept cutting it in half with our air drill. And what we tended to see out there, as we decreased our seeding rate, obviously our plant stands went down.
Right.
Plant stands go down in canola. We're seeing each individual plant within those treatments get bigger, right? So if you have a crop out there with low plant stand, each one of those plants is just bigger in canola. And then versus at the higher seeding rate, the plants were a lot smaller, and there's more of them, but they're a lot smaller out there. Yeah.
Now, one thing I found interesting too, you were dealing with variable rate when it came to like drier areas in the field or wetter areas in the field.
Yeah.
Why were you testing that and what did you see?
Yeah, so what we found with the results of those different treatments out there, we affected the size of the plant, individual plants, and what we found is in dry years, when we had plants at a lower plant stand, they were bigger. The bigger the plants above also meant bigger rooting system.
Right.
So they were able to root down in drier years, drier conditions, and actually pull up maybe more moisture. There was some years where it was really dry, the lowest plant stand actually yielded the highest. So when I take that information, not knowing what next year is going to be as far as wet or dry, I do know in a field though, in our fields on the farm anyway, where we have drier areas versus wetter areas. So now on hilltops or drier areas in general, I maybe want to decrease my seeding rate or have lower plants there versus my lower spots that typically have more moisture. I think higher plant stand is going to be beneficial. The plant doesn't have to waste all that energy building the structure.
Right.
It can just use that moisture to go towards yield.
And now when it came to a larger canola plant that maybe was able to root out a little bit better, was there an advantage when it came to fertilizer uptake and that sort of thing?
It's a great question. If it was utilizing the place fertilizer better, I think more so what maybe was happening was that bigger root system accessed potentially more nutrients that's already in the soil. Gotcha. And utilize that, and actually could find a little bit moisture deeper down in those drier either conditions or drier areas.
Okay, so based on what you're seeing out in St. Brieux and some of your field scale trials, what advice, dare I say, might you have for growers who are looking to maybe play around with their seeding rates a little bit?
Yeah, so the seeding rate trials were a great complement to the fertilizer trials. Seeding rate, what we found was, yeah, you can get a lower plant stand, and you can get more access to moisture in those drier areas, but it does lengthen out your time. The maturity gets longer. So in areas where, let's say up north, if you're chasing frost off in the spring and then it's chasing you off in the fall, maybe you don't want to have a lower plant stand because of that maturity, right? In drier areas, maybe you have a little bit more freedom to utilize a little bit longer maturity times and having those plants create a bigger plant, get into the moisture on that front. But I think the other aspect of this is to say, okay, when it comes to fertilizer placement, if you're putting your fertilizer down and you're finding that in some areas you're actually hurting your crop a little bit, you're having a lower plant stand, then you have to take that into consideration. What's the mortality of my drill? What's the mortality of having fertilizer placed in a certain way? So in that case, you can't really cut your seeding rates.
Right.
So it's a balancing act between the plant stand that you actually want to achieve with what your mortality is and then what your seeding rate is there that comes into it as well.
And the better a farmer knows their fields, the better they're better to manage that, I'm sure, too.
Their fields, their equipment, you know, you can't put a price on knowing what you've done in the past in order to at least help make some changes going forward. But this was just another background info that farmers could take home and maybe try some stuff on their farms.
Sure. Is there anything from your presentation I'm going to ask you about you'd like to maybe mention?
I just think it was great. Manitoba Ag Days had me out here and giving this presentation, being able to talk with the farmers here. We had a lot of good interaction afterwards and during. There's a lot of questions around it, and I think the important thing was I wasn't trying to make a recommendation, just everyone cut their seeding rates.
Yeah.
It was more of a exploration into what that crop is doing on the plant level, and then how we can utilize that in consideration with our fertilizer placement.
Perfect. Thanks for your time, Curtis. Nice
All
meeting
right.
you.
Hey, thank you very much.